Hey, what's up? This is Joshua, daily video blog. Actually, this one's going to be for the MVA Studio channel rather than my normal MVA Joshua channel. So, if you don't subscribe to both, you should. Okay, so today what I want to talk about is the idea of collecting, and this video is more for probably younger designers or even students. So it's about collecting design ephemera and maybe even about the idea of embracing objects over images. So one thing that happens a lot is I'll assign a project and I'll actually require there to be like mood boards or sort of visual design research going into it. And very often students will come back and they'll have all these sort of 11 by 17 mood boards laid out, and I'll see the same work on every single thing that everyone is showing. So something that is getting, it's usually Pinterest is the culprit, but something is getting a bunch of attention and it's getting shared and reshared, and you see it a bunch. And there's actually nothing wrong with that, except that it probably speaks to not casting a wide enough net, and it probably shows you that once you use a tool, the tool shapes what you're going to do with it. So if you're going to use Pinterest for design research, well, there's algorithms feeding you content, and so you're going to end up behaving in ways that are predetermined by those algorithms. So in this case, you're going to pull images that other people have been pulling, and you're going to end up kind of pulling out the same stuff that everybody else pulls out. And again, that's not terrible, but you miss out on other things by not wandering. For me, it's libraries are really helpful, because you can see a broad range of designed things that can be, whatever, 100 years old, depending on the library you're at, and they cover all sorts of subject matter. So it's not just sort of cool subject matter. Like one of my favorite areas to wander is to look through the section that has like maps and geography books and whatnot, and to find old time life geography and state information sort of books. But it's not uncommon that I will just wander a library and just looking at spines and being like, oh, that looks interesting. And then that ends up pulling in a wider range of stuff. It even means that I'm not just going to see things from the last 2 years, which can definitely be a problem when you're in Pinterest or you're in design blogs. The second part of this, I think, is about the value of collecting designed artifacts for yourself. So I scour used bookstores. MCAT, the school I teach at, has a library sale probably once a semester now, and I will just look through every last thing looking for interesting stuff. And I think one of the things that's great about books per se is they're the one sort of designed paper artifact that gets hung onto. Posters get tossed unless they're collected by posters, postcards, ads, magazines, all that stuff, the sort of more ephemeral stuff, disappears, but books tend to find a way to hang on. So you can collect design history through books, and then you can end up having this really broad range of interesting stuff around you. So like I collect kind of mid-century museum catalogs really heavily, probably like 1930s, maybe the 1940s into the 70s. And one of the things that does is it gives me like a first-hand view of how design changed over that 40-year period. But it also, I see lots of this cool, weird, little interesting things that maybe I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. And it gives me more insight into designers. Like there's stuff I own, like I own a catalog designed by Michael Beirut precisely because it is weird and ugly and wonky. And it's kind of interesting to have a piece by a super famous designer that is weird and ugly and wonky, and it casts them in a new sort of more human, more fully well-rounded light, or it captures a portion of their development, because chances are he thought that work was excellent at that moment. So I think that's kind of neat. And the last part of this is looking at objects over images. So just now I was leaving the office and there was an issue of wire sitting on someone's desk, and I grabbed it just to kind of glance at it. I actually thought it was a really old issue because it looked thin as hell. Go figure, that's what May 2016 issue looks like. But when the first pages I opened to had these unbelievably narrow columns. Now the page I was looking at wasn't special in any way, shape, or form. If the art director on that issue was showing it on their website, they wouldn't have shown this page. It was just a boring little page sort of near the front. It had these super narrow columns. And when I looked at it, I was like, whoa, those columns are so narrow, and they're totally readable for what they are. And for me, that's one of the reasons it's helpful, is because you see it and you go like, I didn't realize you could have columns that narrow. And maybe this is how you typeset them when they are that narrow. So all of a sudden there's like a little bit more design knowledge that I got just from glancing at that page, that's an option for a certain type of content. And it's the kind of thing, like if we're looking at the highlights on a Behance page or on a portfolio, we don't see those pages. We only see the big dramatic gestures. But where a lot of practical stuff is happening is in the little bits and pieces that that really kind of affect your work. Hold on, I'm gonna switch arms here. It's getting heavy. And you see that a lot. So looking at old books where the interiors tend to be fairly straightforward or systemic or maybe even default, it can be really cool to actually have access to that and to sort of just be able to analyze a non-conceptual book. Like, how does the structure of a book, like a 60s art catalog designed in a high Swiss fashion, where you're only seeing like things about structure, pacing, and drama, that for me is super interesting, and it feeds into my work heavily. It teaches me little lessons, and again, it's the kind of stuff like, even that book of Swiss graphic design shows the dramatic stuff. It doesn't show the boring 3-column stuff unless it's to illustrate a point of, here's a boring 3-column layout. But there's not enough space to say, okay, so there's a horizon line here, and then that is never violated by type, so that when an image explodes above that horizon line, all of a sudden you've got drama, and you've heightened the rhythm of the book. It's the kind of stuff you can really only get by sitting there with it in your lap, in your hand, and really getting it. Or, you can't learn about designing captions from looking at people's portfolios. You have to look at actual objects and really start to see the finer level of detail. If you ever wonder why everything on the web that gets popular seems so shallow, movie posters rendered in a 2D style with no context whatsoever, super simple line-oriented illustrations, it's not because people are shallow, it's because that stuff reproduces well as an image. A 12-column grid layout with a fairly refined sense of image text interplay and subtle things happening with captions, if it's not super dramatic, that's not going to show up on the internet. It's not as interesting. It's like, it's not simple enough, and it's not colorful enough, and it's not rich enough. It's not one of those extremes. Like, screens reward extremes. But then you can sit with that, like you sit with a catalog designed by Elaine Lustig Cohen, and you can learn so much about typography in work that doesn't show up in history books because it doesn't really illustrate a point, and it's not dramatic enough, and it doesn't sit at an extreme. I think for me, it's like the average person, if they saw the stuff I would collect, they would probably think I'm just collecting the same book over and over and over again. But it's because I will hit some structural thing and be like, oh, that's interesting. Or if I find a Gordon House designed Marlboro Gallery catalog from the 60s, where every other page is on an uncoded stock, and that affects the structure of it, that teaches me so much about limitations that used to affect designers that don't. And then it's also an uncommon reference, because you can look at that and go, oh, it'd be kind of interesting if I did that now, because it would be so unexpected. Then again, it's like, you're not going to see it in a history book. So as a designer, one, if you want to get past looking at all the same stuff that your colleagues are looking at, but two, you want to get a more intimate understanding of graphic design detail. Start collecting things. Used bookstores Salvation Armies, that kind of stuff, that is a designer's best friend, because the used bookstore or the Salvation Army, it doesn't really care about the significance of a Paul Rand designed Paul Klee catalog. And that is immensely lucky for us as graphic designers, because even posters, if you were to find them, someone somewhere is going to think like, oh, this is worth some money. But paperback books, of which there were tens of thousands, is fine. Museum catalogs of some artist that nobody cares about, that's in black and white with poor image quality, that's not going to cost you very much money. And you're going to get this like first-hand view of some designer's expertise, who that was probably one of hundreds of books they designed. And you're extremely lucky having access to it. Alright, it's kind of a long video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you don't follow my other account, sorry, itchy nose, it's MVA Joshua. And also, check me out on Snapchat. I post stuff about creativity and work and whatnot. And again, it's MVA Joshua. Alright, thanks for watching.